On Gorton Moor, 1845. Farmers working in the field, picking potatoes for harvest. They realized something was off, as the crop's roots and tubers were destroyed. This would be the start of a long, hard 7 years. This wasn't the first time a famine spread across the famed Irish crop. In 1740 to 41, there was the year of the slaughter. It was estimated that 2.4 million died from this famine. This was caused by cold, dry weather, which resulted in food shortages across the country. The Great Famine struck the hardest in the south and west of Ireland, where many people were monolingual and only spoke Oscailga, which, other than British tyranny, led to the decline of the Irish language. The British had control of Ireland since the Anglo-Norman invasion in 1169. Since they seated themselves on the Irish land, they grew to rule with an iron fist and a tight grip on their necks. The British had made plantations to take the land from the Irish and gain more control of our land. Oliver Cromwell was no exception. His plantation from 1652 was brutal and malicious. He hated the Irish and he was a Protestant extremist who disagreed with the Catholics. It is estimated that 600,000 Irish people died during his ruthless campaign. At the time, Ireland's population was rapidly increasing, and there wasn't enough food for everyone, as estimates say that 3/4 of the population was unemployed. During the 18th century, a system known as the middleman system was introduced. Landlords would send middlemen to collect the rent and give them free time. But middlemen took advantage and exploited the people by overcharging them. 80% of the population was Catholic and were not financially secure and lived in poverty. The ascendancy class were at the top of the social hierarchy, which was the Anglo-Irish and English. The people of the ascendancy owned most of the land and had extreme power over the tenants. Most rent earned came from the wages of the poor Catholic who sold crops for export, which were most likely shipped to England rather than Irish markets. The British government set up a royal commission in 1843 to inquire about the laws of one owning land. As Catholic leader Daniel O'Connell said it to be perfectly one-sided, as it was composed of only landlords and no tenants. The people were dependent on potatoes, as they were easy to grow and filling. When the famine hit, food was scarce due to food being given to the British rather than Irish. They struggled to get food on the table as many people worked on farms. The rent was still unforgiving to the people, as many of their jobs, but still kept having to pay the rent till they were poor and homeless. The Corporation of Dublin sent a memorial to the Queen to call Parliament together early to recommend the requisition of public money for public works. The Town Council of Belfast had also held a meeting for similar suggestions, but neither party asked for any form of charity. In November 1945, the Duke of Leinster, Daniel O'Connell, and the Lord Mayor went to the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, Lord Heytesbury, to offer suggestions such as opening the ports to foreign corn, prohibiting the exportation of foodstuffs, and providing employment through public work. Lord Heytesbury called them premature, as there was no pressure on the markets. During this time, starvation resulted from exports, but according to statistics, food imports exceeded exports, but the main thing was imported was wheat and maize. 4 times the amount was imported than exported, but people were still starving due to the fact the majority of the wheat was used as livestock feed, and the livestock and other crops were often exported to England rather than across Ireland. Evictions became a common occurrence as landlords needed people who could afford rent. There are only estimates of how many people were evicted during these times. When the police began to keep count, there were almost 250,000 formal evictions recorded between 1849 and 1854. For food, many people had to work in workhouses, where they would build roads for food grown on their land. The rich and British were mostly the ones who ran the workhouses. One famous man who ran one of the houses in Mayo was Mr. Edward Belwit, who was an overseer during the public relief scheme. He is claimed as a hero for feeding those people, but personally, I see these overseers as traitors. Mr. Edward Belwit is none other than the ancestor of Joe Biden. The worst year was 1847, also known as Black 47. During this time 1 million people died and over 1 million left Ireland. By 1855, over 2 million left Ireland, as many more died. People who left went via ships, commonly referred to as coffin ships, because they were riddled with disease. Depending on the year and county, the immigration rate was anywhere from 45% to around 85%, mostly shipped to Wales, Scotland, England, North America, and Australia. In many of these places, the Irish were discriminated against, not being allowed to work and such. The main point of this discussion is whether the famine was technically a genocide or not. Personally, I believe it was to be as such. The taint wasn't as big a problem as we know. There'd have been plenty of food and supplies. The food and livestock was in abundance, but we were starving. I believe the Great Famine to be considered a genocide, as it was the poor Catholics who suffered, not the Protestants in the land. A quote I have seen before read as such: "Nature brought the blight, the British brought the famine." Perhaps the truest description put into words. The British imported our supplies and gave us wheat. We used that wheat to feed our livestock, just to feed them in an imbalanced cycle.
In 1996, the U.S. state of New Jersey included the famine along with the Holocaust in the genocide curriculum after debate on it being considered, while Irish historian Cormac O'Grada disagreed, as he said genocide includes murderous intent, and it must be said that not even the most bigoted and racist commentators of the day sought the extermination of the Irish. In the two-part Irish documentary on RTE, Brendan O'Leary, professor of political science, used the term "genoslaughter" as a more accurate approach. This was a tragic part in Irish history, but spending over 800 years with the British stepping on our throats is insufferable and is rage-inducing. Someone once did an estimate to how much money we are owed for the famine and 800 plus years of oppression, and it came out to around 7 trillion euro, 2 trillion alone for the famine.